I'm Kylie Wolf with TPMA. I'm a senior consultant. I'm already grateful that I didn't have to ask anyone to brave weather to participate today, but still a big thank you to those who are joining and balancing working from home and dealing with the challenges of office closures and all that entails, and still being here and committed to being on this webinar. I already said that thank you to the panelists, but thank you all again. It's exciting talking about this AI and workforce operations and service delivery, and having the folks here that we have on this panel for a really good discussion. This topic is very relevant to many of the work that we are doing in local and state workforce systems across the country. And the information continues to change. Technology is evolving. How people are thinking about this is changing. Every day, every week, every month, we're reading things. So really excited to actually have a chance to sit down and talk about this and think through it with the folks we have here. So I'm going to introduce my panel, and then we'll get started with some questions. First, we have Ken Clark. Ken is the president and CEO of Employ Indy, which is the local workforce board serving Indianapolis in Indiana. Ken's been at Employ Indy since 2023, and prior to that, worked in local government with the city of Indianapolis, where he held roles in finance, operations, information, prior to becoming the controller. Marcus is the director of workforce operations at Philadelphia Works, the local workforce board serving the city of Philadelphia, and has been there since 2022. He works pretty closely with 4 American Job Centers that they have, comprehensive centers in Philadelphia. There they call them PA Career Links in Philadelphia. And they have about a dozen affiliate sites where different services are provided week to week, month to month to different Philadelphia job seekers as well. So a lot to manage in a big city. And Amanda Wagner is Vice President of Operations at Equus Workforce Solutions, which is a national workforce service provider. Prior to there, she was at Employ Prince George's and Prince George's County Workforce Board for a while as COO, and has also worked closely with the Workforce Board in Charleston, South Carolina, while working with Eckerd Connects, along with many other workforce boards. I didn't have time to list them all. So thank you all for being here. To frame this topic a little bit and give you all your first question, as artificial intelligence tools have been evolving over the last few years and becoming more mainstream, a lot of the folks in workforce systems have really felt that growing attention. But a lot of the research and articles that we're reading is around how AI is changing jobs, how we need to prepare people for skills, how it's changing local economies and industries. Those are great and relevant to the field, but today we're focused on something a little bit more immediate and practical for your organizations and the systems that you're working within. And so because the panel here represents a pretty wide range of perspectives and uses of AI, I wanted to just start with a quick round of where you're at today before we dig into more. To kick us off, can each of you talk about where your organization is at today in terms of AI use? I think I gave you guys some prompts to think about.
Thank you all for joining the conversation today. As Kylie said, I know there's a lot of weather people are contending with, but it looks like we still have a great audience. So I'm really excited to be here talking about AI and the future of work and where we're headed at Equus Workforce Solutions, as Kylie mentioned in her introduction. We're a large premier workforce organization that has contracts and workforce development responsibilities across the country, currently operating in 35 states. And as we look at workforce development from an organizational level, we have to be very pragmatic and intentional about the way that we're thinking about using AI. But really, when it comes down to it, we really have to be intentional and ask ourselves, why are we using it? What's the purpose? I know we all see the different tools and things that we can use. And oftentimes we're getting the emails in our inbox of, hey, try this new thing, and this might be good for you. And it's really easy to jump on and say, hey, I want to do this demo, or I want to try this AI tool to make my life easier. But I encourage you all to kind of take a step back and say, what are we trying to achieve here? How might AI improve the services that we operate? And so for Equus, first we think about our staff and think about how we might improve their experience. I know from my perspective, I started as a career coach 100 years ago, but from the ground level, I've never met a career coach that was like, man, I wish I could do more case notes, or I wish I could be, in the system recording an ITA. Those are things that are really burdensome for us social services people who want to really thrive off that human connection. And so that's one area where Equus is really leaning in. How do we make the job of our staff easier so that they can spend more intentional time with their customers? Other things like looking at policy. Could we create a policy agent where we're really looking at being able to scan things quickly so we can get the important information and again apply it accurately. So those are some of the things that we're doing at Equus. But really, I encourage you all as you're listening to this today to really take a step back and stop thinking about the tools and really think about the purpose and how AI may be able to enhance the services that you offer in your local area. Kylie, I see you're back. Hopefully that's okay.
I don't know where I left off, but I'm glad that you just stepped in. So, um, Ken, do you mind answering that question next?
Sure, glad to. Welcome back, Kylie. At Employee Indy over these last couple of years, we've really been looking at AI as a tool we know is going to be used across the country and in the professional world. And so a lot of our early work in AI has been about training our own staff on how to utilize the tool. And so as soon as I was at Employee Indy in 2023, we did some prompt training to understand how to utilize AI, what the different tools are that are available to you for free, as well as we invested in a few paid tools for a subset of our team who were able to utilize it in a more in-depth way. It's a phenomenal tool for grant writing. We write grants constantly, and so being able to have something to start from and react to is incredibly, it quickens the pace of being able to get through that work in a lot faster way, evaluating bids as you look through those kinds of things on the procurement side. We've utilized it a lot for that, building out with a set of prompts and a scoring matrix, and then applying that scoring matrix. It is imperfect. The thing that we've learned more than anything is that it is only a tool, an enablement tool for very smart and intelligent and talented staff. And in utilizing it, we realize that there are lines in the sand here in terms of how far it can go and what it can do for us now, while it's constantly improving. And we see new versions come out sometimes that are unbelievable. Gemini's most recent release is one that really sticks with me of like what it could do just in visualizations so quickly. And so there are new ways to utilize it, but really for us to understand how it's going to impact workforce, what we felt like is that we needed to enable our workforce first. And so our priority has been there. Our next kind of frontier is service delivery, external service delivery, and investing in tools that will allow us to provide service, especially career navigation, resume review, having labor market data for employers, understanding where the labor market's going. There's a lot of value in utilizing paid tools and paid data combined with AI that allow us to synthesize that data in a way that we wouldn't be able to do as quickly as we can now. And so those are a couple of the avenues we've started with. But we know we have a lot of growth to do and a lot of understanding to do to continue to develop in that area. So pass it back to you, Kylie.
Yeah. Marcus, if you don't mind answering that question as well.
Sure. Well, good afternoon, everyone. And I'm really excited to be able to approach this topic from a perspective of really building a human-centered public workforce system. For context, the PA Career system generally engages with an average of 40,000 residents in a given program year. So as you can imagine, that's a lot of PII, that's a lot of information that the security of the data is really paramount. So at this point, I'll say just from a standpoint of our system that we have not reached where we want to go with AI. I think that we're approaching it right now as like a force multiplier, not really a replacement for human judgment. So right now, like the staff generally use AI in like low risk internal only ways. And I think like primarily mentioned it before from Amanda that like summarizing documents, drafting communications, brainstorming training content, and then support the planning for job seekers are coming into the respective centers. But we are not using AI for case management or eligibility, retention validation, or any like participant data workflows. I think that is an opportunity that we absolutely want to explore and expand going forward. We did recently engage with a consultant through an RFP that helped us to identify some innovative solutions that include policy analysis and data extraction, interview preparation and employee training, best practices and journey mapping, that I think that we'll talk about a little bit later. But and also to give you perspective of the guidance that we have received. So we know the USDOL has released like principles and best practices focused on worker well-being and responsible AI use. But we know that they're non-binding, and not specific to WIOA service delivery. So in our conversations with our consultants, it's like, how do we modernize WIOA service delivery so that it's incorporating these AI fundamentals and these AI practices and practices in a safe way that obviously allows for everyone to be comfortable with being able to like utilize and obviously like share information. I will also just say that for Pennsylvania specifically, Pennsylvania has issued statewide AI governance guidance for Commonwealth employees, that's been focused on responsible use, training, and risk mitigation, but really no WIOA specific or workforce system specific guidance has existed or been sent to us. So a lot of this is like the local levels being able to try to identify the best methods and tools and uses that are working with their residents, but that's not really truly informed by any clear strategy from the state or federal partners.
Now, audience, since you've heard a little bit of where everyone's at right now, I want you to know you can submit questions in the chat as we go, and I'll be able to review those. We'll have time for some Q&A at the end after I ask a few more questions to the panelists today. So I wanted to ask you all, how are you thinking about privacy and confidentiality with some of the personal nature of information and data being handled by staff? I know it's been mentioned a little bit already, but how are you kind of approaching that in terms of what you're allowing use of and what maybe you're thinking about for future iterations? For that one, we'll start with Ken.
Sure. In terms of internal use, we had started originally with investing in licenses related to or with ChatGPT as kind of our start of if we're going to use it as an internal tool, could we build out within ChatGPT, ultimately landing on that Microsoft Copilot because that's where the majority of our data is already stored and is separated was a better answer for us long term. So we're in the process of migrating over to utilize that as our main day-to-day worker enablement, like that force multiplier term that Marcus used is really just the force multiplier tool for all of our staff to utilize, which will allow at least our data to remain in an instance that's separate and a little more in our control. And so when I think about, there's direct policy that still needs to be done around within our organization of exactly what can and can't be submitted within Copilot. But we've at least in moving in this direction have a lot more control than what we felt like we had before. I was the chief information officer for the city of Indianapolis for a period of time. And so this is a topic that is really interesting to me. And the understanding of where your data resides ends up being one of the most important parts of this work and something that you need to have a strong IT understanding and an IT team who can support you as you start to figure out what can and can't these tools be used for. There no doubt is a robust policy process that we've kicked off, but we're yet to fully roll out ourselves because that's really what will make the big difference for us, and making sure we're protecting specifically any residents that we're supporting, but also internal staff. In any terms of data, they would feel like you can get very comfortable with these agents, so you have to be really careful of people can become too familiar and too comfortable putting data in that they shouldn't. And so there's a lot of training that will go with our policy rollout when the time comes, but we're not quite there yet.
Marcus, same question.
Sure. So, as I mentioned before, our workforce programs really handle extremely sensitive information, income, immigration status, like disability disclosures, criminal justice involvement. And honestly, Kylie, really, it's really a simple nature. Like if the tool cannot guarantee protection that's at or above the federal or state requirements, then it cannot be used for participant data. And so we just pretty much have that as a blanket, just really operational guidance, like operational statement in terms of like our ways of operating. But I will just mention that like there's some other aspects of this that like that makes us a bit apprehensive to being able to like unleash the full breadth of AI. So like we know about like data handling, and so like we know that many AI tools just don't disclose where the data is stored, and like who can access it. So that's one aspect that we talk about with IT. Like, where's the information going? Where's the like the actual system talking to? How is it receiving the information? Who is it? Who is it then passing the information on to? And then also there's a concern there with like the training risks that's involved within these types of tools, like that requires like user inputs to train future models, which is normally incompatible with confidentiality rules. So that's been one aspect of which we've had to navigate. And then I know that like from a state level and like the federal regulatory standpoint, there's just a lot of ambiguity and uncertainty right now across the space. And when we're dealing with such large systems, we can't. A lot of us like we try to lean in and try to like in some cases like try to push forward and ask for forgiveness later, but we know that this is such a sensitive and like not necessarily explosive, but like a much like a growing topic that is like forming at every given day. So we have been leaning more on the state and the feds to be able to give us more guidance before we can actually like open the hose or whatever water apparatus you want to use there.
Okay, Amanda.
Kylie, I see how expertly you put together this panel because we all have a little bit of a different experience with AI, and I think Ken being former CIO and having experience with technology, you kind of have a leg up. So being kind of a practitioner and growing up through the ranks, I see AI as like this is going to help us do our job, so much better. But thank goodness I have a CIO on my team too who says, "Hold up, wait, let's look at this and let's be really thoughtful about the way that we're implementing AI because nothing's more important than the PII that we hold really close to us in the projects that we serve. And so making sure that the way we're entering data is responsible. We know what we're entering and where that query is going to. But one thing that I really appreciate about Equus is moving forward with not just having prompts, but being able to store prompts in a way that we're able to kind of use them and understand like, okay, we're able to use this prompt and this is what we expect for it to return. So that's something that I think is really helpful when we're thinking about how do we use AI and how do we do it responsibly. So we have a great learning and development team where, I think all of us have a different approach about the way we communicate with AI. And some of us communicate like it's our best friend and, our AI bot really knows us really well. But how do we create AI prompts that are going to return quality information that we can rely on is a piece that our learning and development team is really helpful at helping us understand so that we can push the envelope a little bit. Again, Marcus, I liked when you said to kind of move forward and ask for forgiveness later. I think we're kind of at a happy medium. We're not quite there, but we are trying to kind of push the envelope a little bit because we want to make sure we're optimizing our service delivery strategy so that the job seekers that we're serving are getting support, as quickly and as cost effectively as possible. And so that is trying to implement tools and kind of pushing the envelope a little bit, but also really being thoughtful about privacy. Ken, we also made the same choice about using Microsoft Copilot. Again, as the world is moving, at 100 miles an hour, you're right, like starting with ChatGPT and then realizing, oh, wait, this tool might be better. I think we're all probably in that moment right now of trying to figure out what tools make the most sense. So I love this conversation to learn and kind of validate like we're headed in the right direction and are moving forward, in the best interests of our job seekers and clients.
Kylie, if I could add something, Amanda made me think of something that I just would add, which is like the really interesting part about the larger like technology arc is that you've seen over time in our day-to-day lives how adoption of like a chat bot is not something people took to very well, like in the old world. Like, hey, ask your question here and we'll try to see if there's a canned answer for it, which there almost never is, and it's really annoying to interact with, to this version, which is people becoming familiar like it's a friend. Like we've unleashed something that we hadn't had that was an idea before. And so from a technology perspective and like what this landscape looks like, in a lot of ways, as we think about what this is going to do to kind of initial enrollment of somebody or the initial interest in workforce development and the services we provide from our organizations. What the version of this is likely to be is less like a straight up chatbot, like we're all interacting with ChatGPT or Copilot, and instead a smart form that has AI built into it that allows them to enroll, but in the next step changes what it is because it learns and understands over time what services you may need. Like the customer service journey is going to change so drastically in the next 5 years that like our ability to harness this is going to change how we provide our services in this massive way. If we are even trying a little bit, we'll be able to do it. So it is really interesting how people have become so familiar and comfortable with it. One of the things that'll be interesting to study and understand is that if there are barriers to entry related to education levels, socioeconomics, there's a lot to think about of like, is this truly an accessible tool for all? And how are you going to build tools that are actually accessible for all? They're just questions I don't have answers to. But I like keep thinking like this is such an interesting thing because we knew that the smartphone was this great equalizer, and that almost everybody ended up with one, regardless of what kind of income they had. And so it was an equalizer in some ways. Now it's, become something very different over time. What will this do? And how do we harness it appropriately it's just a really interesting thing to think about and figure out how do we do it appropriately.
Yeah. Smartphone analogy is really interesting because while it opened up a lot of different avenues for communication and being able to search things, it also introduced some of the inequities in where broadband is accessible. And so similarly, as we understand that, these tools are available to everyone, there are going to be challenges we don't even know that people are experiencing until we are faced with that reality. So kind of on that, a little bit of a segue here. Are you all thinking about, or how do you think that the use or integration of AI potentially in service delivery will affect accessibility to workforce services? It could be positive or negative. Just any thoughts you have there. And then as well, if you're thinking about customer trust and what maybe you've heard already from customers in terms of implementing some of these things, I think that would be useful in now as well. For that, we'll start with Marcus.
Sure. So just real quickly, I think that for the question of trust, like we know that trust can erode, like if customers believe that AI is making decisions about services or eligibility. I think that there's an aspect there where we can confirm someone's eligibility, but like in terms of being able to move someone along in the process, that's where I've seen like so much of the trust being eroded because ultimately, obviously, you have a bot or you have this system that is determining whether or not someone can proceed within the application or interview process. So that is naturally been one question and one thought and comments that have consistently come from residents and customers who have come into the centers, like how to avoid that, how to be able to determine. In some cases, many employers are using it, and you can't even necessarily tell that it is AI that is speaking to you or is like analyzing your responses. And then there's also like feedback on platforms that are taking more than just what you say, and obviously like taking like emotives and like certain aspects of your person to be able to make determinations, and which I think has been problematic in some cases. But I will also say that just from an AI accessibility standpoint, I mean this like the ability the advantages here are I think incredible. We can talk about auto translation, plain language summary. So much of the like WIOA and TANF like regulations are coded like in legalese. So being able to give someone some very clear summary of what are those requirements for services are available based on your circumstances. And then multilingual interview prep. And so like, we had in the midst of we have about last time I looked, between 30 to 40% of active participants within our system, English is not their native language. So we need to be able to have a number of different platforms available for folks to be able to engage with services and continue along the process to completion. And I think this is AI is obviously one of those aspects of one of those services that I think can really be able to assist with that.
Amanda, what are you seeing in that space in some of the places you're working?
Yeah, Marcus, I would just say ditto to everything that you just said. I mean, you took the words right out of my mouth in terms of accessibility and the opportunity that exists but also having the responsibility to ensure that we're using the AI in the right ways and that we're not replacing professional judgment. We're not creating like a eligibility bot where, we know it's kind of a yes, no answer. Well, there's a human discretion that's needed in order to really assess somebody for eligibility. And so we have to make sure we're building in those intentional pivot points in our processes to make sure the human connection still exists in our work, because that's largely what we do. And I think oftentimes as we're looking at AI, the risk is we look at this as a shortcut, as a means to an end. That's quicker, more effectively, but without being thoughtful about integrating the human. We are going to lose the trust and credibility of our job seekers or our employers. So that's something that I really think is important to think about as you're looking at this. And I started with saying, like, what are you trying to achieve? I think all of us are trying to achieve efficiency, have more time in the day, big caseloads, big responsibilities. You want to make your life easier, but making sure that you're also thinking about the customer and that it's a customer-centered design as you're making these decisions about the way you're implementing AI.
Any thoughts, Ken, before I go into a different topic area?
Not a ton to add. They both covered it quite well on the accessibility front and the customer journey. I mean, I think the key is to like make sure that there's any information you're collecting through these tools externally facing, that there's always a handoff to a professional and a person who knows this world and can manage it. And so whenever we think about these customer journeys, it's going to be IT people are going to want you to make it all automated and all in one thing. And the truth is that we're best when we make sure we're utilizing the workforce development professionals who have the expertise and can help in the end. But they can have a lot of information up front that allows them to do their job more efficiently and quickly. I like to think about actual WIO enrollment and what that looks like whenever you have already asked a set of questions before they arrive. Man, there's a lot you can get out of that really makes service delivery a lot better if we do it right. So got to be careful to fight IT in the right places as we look through these implementations and think about how it works.
Yeah. I think one example on how it could be used, where AI might find it challenging, would be in selective service eligibility. So men that are 18 plus have to have registered for selective service, but there's a ton of caveats there. So like the minute you do yes or no for an AI, might be like not eligible. But we know that there's like 3 or 4 instances where you can get the right documentation that someone's still eligible. So yeah, trying to train AI to understand that nuance could be challenging, but doable for sure. Transitioning a little bit to talk about policy guidance. We know that there are some like guiding principles, like I think Marcus said, from the federal government level and even state levels in some cases, on wanting more modernization of WIOA and other workforce services. But they are not it's not a how-to guide. It's just, you should be exploring this. And so you're exploring this. Some of you mentioned that maybe already had a policy or have continued to issue updated policies. So a little curious for our audience, if you have an active policy for your staff or for vendors or service providers that you use, what's covered and included in that? If you haven't yet issued an active policy, but you're drafting it, same question. So for that, we'll start with Ken.
Yeah, we're in process now. I would say we don't have an active policy. I wouldn't consider there's still acceptable use, general IT acceptable use policies that impact all systems. So same things with PII are already covered. Employee data, participant data, all of those things are kind of covered under typical privacy policies and confidentiality policies to some extent. But this is a new world, and I think people look at it differently. They're too familiar with it in ways that they aren't in a normal system. In a normal system, you're entering information into forms or into basic things. This is so different because it becomes so conversational that it can be a little more dangerous in that way. And so we are working on a separate policy that outlines specifically how this tool could be used, but it definitely nods to our acceptable use policies and the other policies we already built around privacy and confidentiality. And so some of those will also be updated in the process just to mention AI and some of the pitfalls there. But they're really all internal facing today. In our contracts, there's some language, and we do have some policies we publish for service providers as well. And so those will also kind of be similarly modified to understand what can and can't be utilized in external systems managed by our partners that aren't ours directly. But I feel like we're pretty early still, like not as far along as I would like to be if I were to be honest about it.
Hey, Marcus, where is Philadelphia Works at with this?
Yeah, so very similar to Ken, we don't have an active policy, but we've had a number of internal discussions trying to figure out like to your question, Kylie, what should be considered when we are like, drafting this policy. So, just a few things came to mind just in our discussions of things we wanted to be able to focus on. We wanted to make sure that we have clear definitions of AI and Gen AI. I know that there's obviously like you talk about the different spaces of I think the evolution of this resource. We know that this is really just a start, and there's some differences there. Prohibited use cases. So, like, under what circumstances are like should AI just not be used? Obviously in service delivery or in like data entry. So I think Amanda mentioned case notes, for instance. So that would be an example in which we would want to like prohibit the use of AI for entering case notes. We talked about where is it required for human review of all generated content? Like at what point within this process, like, should that be required? And obviously, like just identify where aspects could like be inefficient if we're including like the human review aspects of that. So we've been trying to figure those out. And then also like the vendor evaluation. So we've talked about ChatGPT, we've talked about Copilot, there's Claude, and like how do we determine like the standards and like the differences between these vendors and kind of like how they're evaluated, especially when we're talking about procurements. We want to obviously make sure that we have equity and bias safeguards, documentation and audit expectations. And then one of the last things that has gotten obviously like a lot of discussion here is like the transparent requirements for participant facing tools. So like if someone were to ask, obviously like, the sourcing of information or essentially kind of like how to use it. Like we don't want to also just make this a tool for our staff to be able to use. How can we then like pass this on to participants so that they can then be able to obviously get comfortable within their use of it. They can start to figure out like, the questions that they want to be able to ask the staff members who may be using it more frequently or are aware of how it's being used within the employment space. So those are some of the topics that we've been talking about internally.
Amanda? And, and I kind of want to ask you that question generally, maybe for Equus, but also you're operating in a few different areas. And so how are you kind of adapting to the different policies that local areas have?
Yeah, that's kind of the thought that I was having as I was listening to both Marcus and Ken talk is that, the way that Equus has approached our policy thus far is really trying to be intentional and pragmatic, trying to make sure that we're creating a policy where we're, kind of making sure we're having guardrails and safeguards around privacy and, being thoughtful about the process itself, making sure that we know what prohibited uses and things of that nature, but also creating enough space that if there is a workforce board that's really, has a clear policy and wants to move forward, that we're not prohibiting that or conflicting with that policy. So our approach is probably a little bit more general. I think that we have specific guardrails in place to protect our team, but we also have to encourage experimentation too, so that we can keep up with the most current uses, especially when we're working in areas that, are really encouraging the use of AI and have some real specific ways that they're moving forward. And so, we kind of have to have that balance where we have a policy as Equus as a national service provider, but then that we're able to flex when we go to local areas. So if we were in Philadelphia, we would be able to align with what Marcus's view is on things. Vice in the U.S. Virgin Islands, for instance, AI is the way to go because they have limited staff, 3 islands, a lot to take on. They're looking at this as a solution to help with their capacity constraints. So they've really taken on an approach where they, really want to look at different tools to help advance their service delivery. So we have to be able to respond to that too.
Okay. So moving on to kind of the last theme that I had, and a reminder to the folks that are here, yes, the chat is disabled, but you can submit questions through, I think it's a Q&A button at the bottom. So you should be able to do that. I've gotten 2 so far. But questions still for the panel. What are one use case, the most realistic and valuable use case that you think there is for AI for workforce boards and job centers. And maybe it's what you all are thinking about there, but also know that a lot of the audience is workforce boards in other areas. So where do you really think there's the most value? And if you have to name two, that's okay. But really, what's top of mind? Let's start this one with Amanda again.
I think one of the things that I'm most excited about is making sure that we are creating sources for our job seekers where they really see the value in using AI. And so when I think about the job seekers that we serve, oftentimes they come in and they either don't know what career pathway is going to be best suited for them, or they're unsure of the logistics of how to get from point A to point Z. And so for me, one area where we've really been leaning into is looking at a business services tool and kind of a job matching tool where we can look at and kind of parse out resume skills and then understand based on a job seeker's interest and aptitude, how we can take a job seeker from, their general interest and the skills that they're at now and advancing them along a career pathway. So the end result is, job placement and a quality career. What does that look like? And kind of demystifying that pathway. So that's an example of a direct services module that we're kind of working with right now to see if we can launch in a local area and pilot, but essentially saying, okay, this is my job seeker. This is the resume that they're, coming in with. And from there, let's look at what training they need in order to get to the next place. So we've looked at kind of the local eligible training provider list. And so we're able to say, okay, Amanda's interested in healthcare. This is her resume. She has no healthcare experience. She's kind of babysat a little bit, but nothing beyond that. And then here are the places where she could go to get trained. Here are the jobs that are available as an end result, if she gets that certification, so that for Amanda, you'll be able to see there is a clear pathway and I can do this and my end result is attainable. I think that's really powerful because oftentimes we're telling job seekers that, but they can't see it. And I think to see it is to believe it. And so having a tool that helps job seekers kind of along that pathway could be really helpful. So I'm excited to look at that a little bit more and hopefully pilot something like that soon.
Thank you. Ken, same question.
Amanda's got it dead on. The best opportunity is like the kind of being able to look very broadly at somebody's experience, understand where the labor market's headed, understand what kind of trainings are available, and to be able to generate something of value. Today, we're doing that with one-off siloed things that are separate. And the best way for us to serve, especially like be realistic, right? We will have another recession whenever that is, whether we're in it or it's coming. What we will need more than anything is immediate capacity. And if we have not prepared ourselves with one of these tools that allows us to do this, we won't be as effective at being able to manage the onslaught of participants who need help and need to figure out what the right place to spend their time and effort is, whether it's skilling up or repurposing their skills into another career, whatever that may be. The thing that's critical here for all of us to remember is that we're probably not going to build it on our own. Be realistic about where we are as workforce boards and what we have available to us. We, on occasion, when these things happen, right, if we have high unemployment, we'll see money dropped in the workforce system. There's no question. If anybody who's been in this for a long time knows that that's how this goes, that it's looked at as the solution. Let's solve this unemployment problem by putting money into the workforce system. Okay. What's really going to happen is that the investment's going to be made in the private sector and the private market, that the money is there for research, and to be able to do that R&D and come up with these solutions. And so we're going to have a slate of solutions that are going to come out in the next few years. They're going to come from private entities, and it's going to be us evaluating and buying what we think is the most flexible for the needs that we have in our communities. And so the thing I would think about is like, it's not a question of what the most valuable thing in workforce development will be. Amanda's hit it dead on. And it's really the center of all these different things that we have that we're trying to piece together through just one single professional as a career navigator will now come presented in a much more easily, palatable way to a regular person probably than it had been before. I still think that workforce development professional is there to help guide. And I still think it's really valuable. But what we're watching now, what we'll have to watch is what the market brings to us. I think it's going to happen very naturally. And now it's going to be us assessing We live in a capitalist society. What in the private market is going to provide the best solution, and which ones we'll get on board with? Being an early adopter can be great, but it can also be really hard in these moments. And so I think we'll double down in the short term and maybe even in the midterm in investing in our own skills within our own workforce and making sure we understand these tools. But what I see as the game changer in workforce development is that really what Amanda's been talking about. And I think that's probably going to come from the private market, not from us developing it on our own.
Yeah. And just like a note before I let Marcus answer the same question, I just have this image in my mind of some of the navigators in these American job centers. They have like 5 windows pulled up at all times, right? They've got labor market information here, job posting site here, participant thing here, and then some other eligibility. It's all pulled up at once. It really would be nice if everything was a little bit more condensed into 1 or 2 tools. But then the buy-in can be really tricky for some of the staff who have been using some of these things for a really long time and are used to the next shiny thing being, put across their desk, trained on, and then, only used for a little bit before it becomes obsolete. So I think that's also something to be cautioned against as well for the folks here that are listening to what's being said. Now, Marcus, I'll let you answer the same question.
No worries. So completely agree with Ken and Amanda. I mean, the idea of we have like countless MOU partners. We have a number of like service providers across the entire system, and just to be able to have a system that can identify where someone's like access to services can be in a much more efficient way is, I think, will be paramount. But I'll just add to that, those multiple screens that you were talking about, Kylie. I think like there's one screen that has like the policy itself, and I think we all know that the system itself can be an impediment to folks actually making progress because we're still asking people to do it like many things that are antiquated or not even really really doesn't even make sense any longer considering like the time that we're in. So I would love to be able to either complement what Amanda and Ken is saying by also having a tool that does like policy and document support, summarizing Teagles, state guidance, like long policy documents. We know that WEO reauthorization is a thing. We know that there's Teagles being released at all times. And so how are staff just consistently updating themselves and participants with like new access points, like new eligibility requirements, new things that may be new processes that may need to be considered when someone is trying to get access to services, and then to find a more efficient way to be able to get that to those customers, like obviously in the quickest way possible. So a lot of what we have to deal with is just not necessarily knowing what a person is eligible for based off of their current situation, because so much of this is wrapped in policy. So if we can be able to have a tool that ultimately helps to analyze that, summarize it, and be able to push it out, I think that will also assist as well.
That's a great insight. Thank you. What do you think is the biggest capability or support that you wish was in existence, or maybe it is in existence and you're using to help workforce development leaders who are thinking about this? So like, where are you going to get the information that you need to move forward with this? We'll start this one with Amanda.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different resources and tools that are out there. It's kind of making the time to sit in and learn and make it really an intentional piece of your day or your month or your schedule, I would say. So like last week, I think NOB had a webinar similar to this. We're all kind of investing in let's get best practices and learn from each other. I would love to see a community of practice around AI so that we could really learn and be intentional with our time and look at those who are kind of trailblazers and pushing the envelope and moving forward, and have really intentional ideas and policies around AI and how they're using it. And then, for others that are a little bit more conservative in their approach, to kind of raise those questions and, kind of give the side eye a little bit and be like, wait, are you sure that's okay? So that we can have really intentional conversations. I do say that with 560 workforce boards across the country, we still oftentimes operate in silos. There is so much talent across this country. How might we work together so that we can, have these best practices and move forward intentionally? I think that's where I would love to see it. So Kylie, TPMA, there's your call to action.
Here we go. If you all get a phone call from me asking you to join this again, you're going to say yes.
Yeah.
No. Marcus, same question about the biggest capability or support you wish existed for the workforce leaders thinking about this right now.
Well, I mean, thankfully, we were able to release an RFP to be able to bring on a consultant to really help us with defining this modernization effort. So, for the past year, we've been working with Deloitte to be able to do this work. And part of the deliverables that really came from that was to be able to create these sub reports and these kind of like how they're bucketed more so of stabilizing, optimizing, and enhancing. Like, how do we get the infrastructure of the system in a space ready to be able to integrate this type of platform and this type of system and tool like into it? Like, what trainings are necessary? What documents will be needed? Just ultimately like what's the infrastructure? And then once we are confident that that is in place, then we can move on to the optimizing. And the optimizing is where we start to integrate so many of those platforms like the policy analysis and document extraction, or additional external partners, because we just want to make sure that the system is prepared to be able to assist and it's not really seen as something that really comes and goes and doesn't stick. Like I think so many initiatives, I would assume a lot of people have the same experience. We introduce something new, like think that is like a great idea, and ultimately it's an idea for the time. It doesn't stick, and then essentially another something happens, like we have a pandemic, and then ultimately we come out of it and it doesn't exist anymore, or it exists within a different, or it looks a bit different. So just making sure that like once the system is in a place where it can definitely be able to absorb and take that and run with it is it's kind of like it's what we ask for our consultant to be able to identify like those activities so that we can then move on to the optimizing phase. So
Thank you. Really cool project that you guys, yeah, were working on with Deloitte. So that's really interesting and good to hear that you kind of took that step to see where to go from there. Ken, same question for you.
My similar answer. I mean, I think community of practice is interesting to me, mostly in that I think it's a little bit of the wild, wild west right now for all of us. We're just trying to navigate through and figure out what does and doesn't work. And so where there are successes or failures, all of us don't love talking about failures in our professional lives, but they're important to talk about. I've had quite a few of my own over the years, that I still talk about because I think people need to know. But I think this is a moment of what's really working and be able to actually share, like see it. So show me how you use that. Show me how it's changed how you do your work. Let us see if that would work here or not. A lot of what I've been doing, I'm in week 7, now week 8. This is my 8th week in my new role as president and CEO of Employee Indy. And so much of what I'm doing is trying to go and meet with others who I think are progressive and doing interesting work in other areas so we can try to leverage that for our own community. And so this is no different. This is the same thing where we're doing this well. We need to be sharing with each other and showing how it can do, because we're not really competing with each other in this regard. We're all just trying to serve our own communities. To Amanda's point, we act in silos that don't make sense for us because we really aren't competing with each other in this scenario. Like it's an enablement for all of our communities and all people across the country. So why not share everything we can? In my IT world, we would go to events like, Gartner would tell us what the best of the financial management systems were, or, content management systems for websites. Like there's something similar for this in the workforce development world that we need. And you'd think those national organizations would really lead on that, but they're so broad that they can't seem to get down to the level we need. And so this needs its own community of practice. And if we're going to put our effort into it, we all need to be sharing what our own best practices are and what we're seeing. That would be my goal.
Yeah, thank you. I had a couple questions come through the Q&A, so I wanted to share those now. And if additional ones come through, if we have time, we can cover those. Amanda, one question was for you. Is there a software that you're currently looking at for that type of job matching or career pathway tool, or is that just kind of an idea?
Yeah, we're just starting to develop one actually in-house, and so we found a developer, and I kind of am one to share my big crazy ideas in random social settings, and so met somebody who was like, I think I can do that, and so we've been working on it for a while now, and I'm excited to move it forward. So once it launches, I'm happy to share who we're working with, how it goes.
See, guys, Equus is going to build. See, you got to watch. You got to watch them. They're all going to go do this for us. Like we just need
Yes.
to pay attention.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ken.
Is there a go-to source or a place that you all have found value in for some of that prompt engineering that we talked about a little bit earlier? That was one of the questions. And yeah, we talked about how it's helpful to kind of frame things a certain way and save them. Have you guys found anything that's been particularly helpful for that?
We had a local IT company who helped us initially do just like basic prompt engineering for people who were very young and new at this and hadn't used it yet. So all of our employees got trained on that just to learn what these tools can do and how you develop a prompt and like a set of prompts. And I think we've also had some workforce specific in trainings as well that my teams have done and then been training teams individually on over time. But I don't remember off the top of my head which ones we utilize for that, unfortunately. But for basic prompt engineering, there's lots of people doing that work, and it can be really helpful and honestly can be just like 30 minutes to an hour of someone's time. And then all of a sudden it unlocks for a lot of staff, like what this thing really is and what it can be for.
I'll say that I the NOB conference last, or not conference, but webinar last week was about those prompts. And so I'm happy to share. They didn't provide the recording just yet, but they did provide the kind of prompts that were talked about during that webinar. So Kylie, I can send you that. I'll forward you that email. And if you want to send it out to the attendees, so resource sharing is key. So happy to share that with you.
Thank you. I wonder if I could AI prompt AI to tell me how to prompt AI.
Probably so.
Teach me.
It would probably talk nice to you too. And thank you for the question.
Yes. Yes. Marcus, do you have anything you guys are looking at for that kind of support for your team?
Yeah, this was this was one of the deliverables from the consultants. So we did get like a list of like some best practices there. But like to Amanda's point, like we've been just trying to join as many webinars and as possible on the subject and just being able to collect as many resources as we can find.
Yeah. I would say to the folks in the audience, like I've been targeted by ads for classes I can take for prompt engineering, and many of them are free. So as long as they're not like a huge time burden on me, I'm willing to take a look at that and see if it helps, especially for the beginning of stages of using a new tool. So I like didn't, we've been using Copilot for a year now, but I did not know how to use that when we started doing that. And so a little bit of help right away there was helpful as well. So I'm sure after being on this webinar, you'll start to get ads for that as well. One more question that I have for you guys before we kind of close out is what questions do you think that boards and service providers should keep asking as things evolve? I feel like there's just a lot to manage in terms of the news, updates to tools, new software. What are some of those top of mind questions you think others, especially the ones that are participating today, should be thinking about? And for that, I'll start with Ken.
So, the privacy thing has to remain kind of top of mind for all of us. Privacy and confidentiality. I think this is one of those technologies that's going to tempt people to push it further than we should. And so that line and agreeing on what that line is going to be critical for workforce boards. And not in a protectionist way. I believe in like the workforce development professionals, especially those frontline staff and the unique skills it takes to fully wrap around a person and understand them enough to help guide them and where they're headed. That is a very unique skill, and understanding where they may have aptitude or interest and like really feeling all those out. There are a million things that do those assessments today. We utilize them all differently and they're valuable and capable. But I don't think being protectionist and saying we're not going to do this because it replaces people is the way to approach this. I think it's really truly using that terminology that Marcus said first, I think on here, which is force multiplier, that we believe we can serve more and serve them better utilizing this technology. And so deciding what your own line is and holding that line with your board members, but your organization broadly is critical. I think it is this scary topic to a lot of people across the country right now, the idea of us being replaced by machines. And there's just a lot of this that won't. And so managing that with care and with thoughtfulness and with a lot of humility and patience for the staff, for the fear that I think they're feeling in this moment is something to think about as you approach this. And so it's likely slow in some ways in how it comes about, even though it's moving so fast. And so we're allowed to take our time and think about it carefully. And I think you have to decide what your line is, and every organization leader is going to have a different one. And like we're the test beds. So sharing as much as we can with each other will be the key.
Marcus, questions you should think the audience should be thinking about?
Yeah, so I mean, they've really touched on a lot of the topics that we discussed here today. And Amanda, I apologize because I may say you're questioning because this was something you mentioned a little bit earlier. But what problem are we solving? All right. So, and not necessarily what tools are we trying to use, but really just being able to identify what that problem is, because that may and will probably dictate what tool, obviously, you want to be able to utilize. Where does the data go and who controls it? Is one thing that we have been like our IT team just says all the time. So I like ad nauseum at this point. And I'll just also just say like from a staff standpoint, what training do staff need to use AI responsibly? And I will actually another thing just came to mind, and I'll be remiss not to say this. What specific guidance do we need from state and federal partners? Like we may not need for the state to be able to release a full like policy document or full TICO or anything like that, but like there are definitely going to be some areas as we try to implement this that is absolutely going to need verification, guidance from like obviously like our federal or state or government partners to be able to ensure that we can continue down this path or this use case. So we will need guidance. We will need training. What problem do we have? And ultimately, like, where does the data go?
And Amanda,
Marcus, I think you just sent a text over to Kylie and said you'd pay her $5 to go before me. Yeah, I was thinking about, what problem are you trying to solve? What are you trying to achieve? But I'll take it kind of a step further and say, what do we already have in our toolbox? Like, what do we have that we're not optimizing? I'll say that when I just transitioned to Equus, I had no idea all of the integration that exists with the Microsoft stack. And I certainly wasn't optimizing that at my former employer. So using Teams as your general platform and having it integrated with SharePoint and having a single sign-on with other apps so that you can get to places quickly. That's been a dream come true for me, honestly, something as simple as that. And so looking at the tools that you already invest in, I know most areas already have a Microsoft license. They have a ton of tools that exist and complement each other for project development or project management and development. And so I just, look at what you already have and how that might solve the problems that may exist and make your job and life easier. So I would kind of end with that.
thank you. I really like it. Kind of was the last question, but it also was really helpful. I think closing thoughts. I really appreciate your preparation. I know I sent a lot of emails and questions for you all to think about to make sure we could really extract the most out of a single hour asking some really tough questions. And for all the folks who joined us and were listening and sent some questions in, really appreciate your time. And if you're thinking about this and you obviously want to reach out to myself or any of the folks that are on the call, I mean, I won't open up their calendars to everyone, but I'm sure they would be open to an email or two. And we'll follow up with an email, and I will include the stuff that Amanda was talking about from Knob to the extent that I'm able to pull some of that information for all of you, because I think that is a very helpful resource in this moment, thinking about how we can use some of these tools better. So thank you all, and good luck in your weather journeys and also in your AI journey as we move forward. So thank you, and have a great rest of the week.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so
Bye.
much.
Bye.